In this video, we are going to talk about the complexity of the digestive system and in particular about the digestion and absorption of macronutrients. Digestion begins in the oral cavity, where we have teeth and tongue that are responsible for starting digestion. The teeth participate in digestion through chewing that allows the grinding of food. The teeth are covered by a very hard substance called enamel, which in fact is the most resistant substance that our body can synthesize. And it is necessary because in certain areas, especially the molars, the pressure that the teeth exert on food is enormous, comparable to the pressure a person weighing 80 kilos would generate with their own weight. And to avoid fractures, it is why the teeth are protected by a substance such as enamel. The tongue also participates in the digestion of food in the oral cavity. The tongue is a very flexible muscle. In fact, it is the most flexible muscle in our body. The function of the tongue is to mix the food and recover food remains that may have been distributed throughout the oral cavity and bring them to the center to facilitate chewing. Saliva also plays a very important role in digestion. There are different types of salivary glands. The sublingual and submandibular salivary glands continuously produce saliva. Saliva contains calcium that is necessary for the formation of enamel. This saliva produced by the sublingual and submandibular salivary glands contains a higher proportion of calcium that can be deposited in the form of tartar, and therefore these salivary glands are primarily responsible for the formation of tartar. The parotid salivary glands do not produce saliva continuously, but only when we eat, and this is because saliva plays a very important role in the digestion of food in the oral cavity. Saliva participates in digestion by lubricating food, which makes it easier to chew. It also contains a protein that is an enzyme called amylase, which is capable of digesting carbohydrates that are present in the food. Enzymes are key proteins in digestion that act like scissors, cutting food and macronutrients into small pieces until obtaining the biomolecules that compose them. The enzymes that allow us to digest carbohydrates and obtain the biomolecules that compose them, that is, monosaccharides, are called amylases. The enzymes that allow us to digest proteins and obtain amino acids are called proteases. And the enzymes that allow us to digest lipids and obtain fatty acids and glycerol are called lipases. Saliva contains amylases, which is why the digestion of carbohydrates present in the food begins already in the oral cavity. Saliva is generated from blood and therefore contains some components of the immune system which are present in blood, such as antibodies. In the oral cavity, saliva is in contact with the outside from where pathogens can enter. So it acts as a protection barrier, and antibodies play a very important role in this protection. Mucins in saliva also have a protective function. Mucins are substances capable of binding pathogens to facilitate their removal. Mucins are responsible for making bubbles with saliva like babies do. The agglutination of pathogens is very useful since there are also proteins with bactericidal action in saliva that can attack and destroy pathogens. Non-pathogenic bacteria also live in saliva and occupy the oral surface, preventing it from being colonized by pathogenic bacteria. The bacteria reproduce more during the night because there is less production of saliva and therefore also of components of the immune system. For this reason, it is very important to clean your teeth before going to bed to reduce the number of bacteria that can multiply at night, and also to clean your teeth in the morning to eliminate excess bacteria that have multiplied during the night. Saliva also contains a substance called opioorphin, which is a powerful pain reliever, 6 times more powerful than morphine. This raises the question, why such a powerful pain reliever is needed in saliva? Well, it is needed because both the oral cavity and the tongue are full of nerve endings that make them extremely sensitive. Surely you have all experienced the inconvenience that a small seed that remains embedded in the teeth can cause, or the ease with which sand is detected in the food, and in the same way how painful wounds are in the mouth, no matter how tiny they are. All these sensations would be unbearable if we did not have opioorphin in the oral cavity. The food that has begun to be digested and is called food bolus passes from the oral cavity to the pharynx. The passage of the food bolus from the oral cavity to the pharynx is produced by a voluntary movement called swallowing. Swallowing is quite a complex movement because it requires the coordination of several cranial nerves located in the brain stem. Proof of the complexity of this movement is that babies have to learn to swallow, and also when the elderly have serious cognitive problems, they may have difficulties in this coordination and therefore in swallowing. Such swallowing problems are called dysphagia. Dysphagia affects 30% of people with multiple sclerosis. And the main causes of this dysphagia are the existence of lesions in the brainstem that affect the coordination of swallowing, or the existence of lesions in other areas of the brain that cause cognitive dysfunction and therefore problems in the coordination of swallowing. The pharynx opens to two tubes, the trachea that leads to the respiratory system, that is, to the lungs, and another, the esophagus, that leads to the digestive system. At the entrance of the trachea, there is a valve called epiglottis that can be moved by closing and opening the entrance to this tube. When we breathe, the epiglottis opens so that air can access both ducts. When we eat, the epiglottis closes, preventing the food bolus from slipping through the tube that leads to the lung and only allowing access to the esophagus, which leads to the digestive system. From the pharynx, the food bolus passes into the esophagus. The food bolus advances through the esophagus thanks to an involuntary movement called peristalsis. Due to its small diameter, the esophagus has to deform to allow and facilitate the advance of the food bolus in a similar way to how food advances in snakes. From the esophagus, the food bolus passes into the stomach. The stomach is made up of three muscular layers that are necessary for the stomach to be able to dilate and allow the entry of large amounts of food. In addition, these three muscle layers are also responsible for the movement of the food bolus inside the stomach, which on the one hand stimulates the stomach cells to produce gastric juice and on the other hand facilitates the mixing of the food bolus with this gastric juice. Gastric juice contains hydrochloric acid that serves to digest all nutrients, proteases that digest proteins, mucus that protects the stomach cells from the gastric juice itself, and gastrin, which is a hormone that induces the production of gastric juice in a process known as positive feedback. After digestion in the stomach, the food is fragmented into small pieces of less than 2 millimeters and is no longer called bolus but chyme. The chyme passes through the pyloric sphincter or pylorus to the small intestine for its complete digestion. The time that food is in the stomach for digestion varies depending on its composition. Foods rich in carbohydrates, such as pasta, spend a short time in the stomach, less than 2 hours. From the stomach, these foods pass to the small intestine where they are completely digested, and the glucose that composes them passes into the blood in less than 2 hours after ingestion. This is the reason why athletes eat carbohydrate-rich dishes before competitions, to be sure that they will have enough energy for the competition in a short period of time. Foods rich in proteins and lipids, such as sausages, require more time to digest in the stomach, around 6 hours. This is the reason why after eating dishes of this type we feel full for a longer time. Foods rich in proteins are in the stomach for a longer period of time because there are proteases that allow their digestion. From the stomach, the chyme passes into the small intestine. The duodenum, which is the part of the small intestine that connects to the stomach, is where most of the digestion of food and absorption of nutrients takes place. The liver, which is located next to the intestine, secretes a substance called bile or gall that is stored in the gallbladder. When the chyme reaches the duodenum, the gallbladder detects it and contracts, releasing the bile into the small intestine. Bile is very important in digestion as it contains substances capable of emulsifying lipids. The arrival of the chyme to the duodenum is also detected by the pancreas, which secretes enzymes like amylases, proteases, and lipases that are necessary for digestion. The passage of chyme through the small intestine also stimulates the production of amylases and proteases by the cells of the intestine themselves. In the presence of bile and all these enzymes, the chyme is digested and the biomolecules that make up the macronutrients are released, that are monosaccharides, mainly glucose from carbohydrates, amino acids from proteins and fatty acids, and glycerol from lipids. These molecules are absorbed and pass into the blood to be distributed throughout the body and used by organs and tissues that need them for their functioning. Monosaccharides and amino acids pass directly into the blood, while fatty acids and glycerol first pass into the lymph, which is a circulatory system that runs parallel to the blood, and from the lymph, they pass into the blood. The structure of the small intestine with villi and microvilli renders the process of absorption of these biomolecules very efficient. Once the chyme has been digested in the small intestine and the nutrients have been absorbed, the remains of food that can no longer be digested pass into the large intestine or colon. The large intestine is made up of epithelial cells that are covered by a mucus, in which bacteria of the intestinal microbiota live. These bacteria are capable of digesting the remains of food that we cannot digest in a process called fermentation. During fermentation, products such as vitamins and short-chain fatty acids are produced, which are very beneficial to the body and are therefore absorbed and pass into the blood. Finally, the remains of food that cannot be digested by the bacteria of the gut microbiota are excreted through the anus in a process called defecation.